My son pushed me into the lake, saying, "Cool off, old man." While I was choking on water, he laughed as if it were a joke. But when I got out onto the shore, shivering and wet, I took out my phone and showed him something, and his smile disappeared instantly, because now the betrayal had turned into justice, and the consequences for him would be devastating. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. The medical bill trembled in my weathered hands. $3,000 for last month's emergency room visit. At 70, these numbers hit differently than they used to. The kitchen felt smaller somehow, morning light filtering through Margaret's yellow curtains, highlighting every dust mote that danced in the still air. The grandfather clock in the hallway marked 9:30 with its familiar chime when the phone rang. That old rotary phone Margaret insisted we keep, black bakelite worn smooth by decades of conversations. The caller ID showed Brandon's number, which made me pause. My son rarely called before noon. "Dad?" His voice carried that artificial brightness I'd grown to recognize over the past few months. "Listen, we should, spend some time together today. At the lake." I set the bill aside, studying my reflection in the chrome surface of the toaster. "What exactly do you want to discuss, son?" "Better face to face. Family time, you understand?" Traffic sounds buzzed through the phone. He was calling from his car. "Bring swim trunks. We'll make it fun. The kids are excited." Something in his rushed breathing made my chest tighten. "Brandon, what's this really about?" "Dad, please. Can you meet us at Lake Harmony around noon?" I walked into the living room, picking up the framed photo from the side table. Brandon at 10 years old, gap-toothed grin, holding up a fish we'd caught together. When had that earnest boy become this stranger who asked about property values and retirement plans in conversations that felt more like interviews? "You've been different lately," I said, settling into Margaret's chair. "Those questions about the house, about my finances. I'm just concerned about your future, Dad. We all are." The word concerned hung between us like smoke. Concerned about what? I'd been managing fine since Margaret passed. Better than fine. I'd been careful, responsible, the way she'd taught me. "Noon, then," I heard myself saying. "But Brandon—" "Yeah? Whatever this is about, we'll handle it together, like family should." The line went quiet, except for the hum of his engine. "Thanks, Dad. That means everything." After he hung up, I sat holding the phone, listening to the dial tone. "Thanks for what?" The question followed me to the hallway closet where my old leather jacket waited. Margaret had bought it for my 60th birthday, said it made me look distinguished. I grabbed my keys from the hook, their familiar weight reassuring in my palm. Through the front window, my neighborhood looked peaceful. Mrs. Chen watering her roses, the mailman whistling his usual tune. Everything normal, everything safe. But my hands were shaking as I reached for the door handle. The garage door groaned open, revealing my old Ford pickup in the filtered sunlight. I stood beside it for a moment, muscle memory making me check the oil dipstick, test the tire pressure with my boot. Delay tactics, Margaret would have called them. Ways of avoiding what I already knew was coming. 27 years of marriage teaches you to read the signs. 37 years of fatherhood teaches you to read between the lines. I climbed the stairs to our bedroom, each step creaking in its familiar pattern. The swim trunks sat in the bottom drawer of my dresser, folded beneath sweaters I hadn't worn since last winter. As I lifted them out, something crinkled. An old photograph tucked between the fabric. Lake Harmony, summer of 2019. Brandon's arm around Isabel, both kids splashing in the shallow water, while I grilled burgers on the portable barbecue. Before Isabel started avoiding my calls. Before Brandon's business troubles that he thought I didn't notice. That awkward dinner 3 weeks ago flashed through my mind. "Dad, have you ever thought about estate planning? Really thought about it?" The way his eyes wouldn't meet mine when he asked. The nervous laugh when I mentioned my financial advisor. I walked to the bathroom, shook out my morning pills into my palm. Heart medication, blood pressure pills. The daily reminders that 70 wasn't 50 anymore. In the mirror, worry lines creased my forehead deeper than usual. Gray stubble made me look older, more vulnerable than I felt inside. Was I overreacting? Reading too much into a son's invitation to spend time with his family? But Margaret's voice whispered in my memory. Trust your instincts, Derek. They've never steered you wrong. Back in the garage, I packed a small cooler with water bottles, added some granola bars from the pantry. My phone vibrated against my leg. A text from Brandon. See you soon, Dad. Thanks. There it was again. Thanks. Not looking forward to seeing you or drive safely. Thanks, like I was doing him a favor. Like I was solving a problem I didn't even know existed yet. I checked my phone battery. 60%. On impulse, I grabbed the car charger from the workbench drawer. Something told me I might need it later, though I couldn't say why. The house key felt heavier than usual as I locked the front door. I stood on the porch for a moment, looking back at the home Margaret and I had built together. 43 years in this house. Every room held memories, every corner told a story. Why did it feel like I might not see it the same way when I returned? I backed out of the driveway slowly, watching my house shrink in the rearview mirror. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than they needed to, knuckles white against the worn leather. The engine hummed its familiar tune, but today even that comfort felt hollow. Whatever waited for me at Lake Harmony, I was driving toward it, with my eyes wide open. The transition from city streets to rural highway took 40 minutes, exactly as I'd expected. Lake Harmony appeared through the trees like a painting, blue water reflecting the July sky, surrounded by pines that had stood here longer than I'd been alive. The parking area held only a few cars, Brandon's newer SUV among them. I parked beside his vehicle, noting the car seats and scattered toys visible through the windows. Normal family chaos. Juice boxes, coloring books, Emma's stuffed elephant with the missing ear. For a moment, my worry eased. How serious could any problem be when there were still children's toys and forgotten snacks? Grandpa? Emma's voice cut through the morning air like sunshine. 8 years old and pure energy, she sprinted toward me with James close behind, his 6-year-old legs pumping to keep up. I caught Emma in a bear hug, spinning her around until she giggled. Easy there, sweetheart. You'll make your old grandpa dizzy. James crashed into my legs, wrapping his arms around my waist. Can we go swimming now? Mom packed our suits and everything. After we eat lunch, buddy. Patience. I ruffled his dark hair, so much like Brandon's had been at that age. Good things come to those who wait. Over their heads, I watched Brandon and Isabel approach from the picnic tables. Isabel looked thin, her usually bright smile forced and brittle. She avoided my eyes, focused instead on smoothing James's hair where I'd mussed it. Brandon carried himself differently, shoulders tight, one hand constantly checking his phone. Dad, thanks for coming. Really? He clapped me on the shoulder, but the gesture felt rehearsed. Beautiful day, isn't it? It is. I studied his face, noting the dark circles under his eyes, the way his jaw clenched when he thought no one was looking. How's business been, son? Good, good. You know how it is. His laugh sounded hollow. Hey, kids, why don't you go throw the frisbee over by those trees? Grown-ups need to chat for a bit, Emma pouted. But we just got here. Go on, Isabel said softly. We won't be long. I watched my grandchildren trudge away, frisbee in hand, their excitement dimmed by adult tension they couldn't understand. Emma kept looking back at us, her 8-year-old intuition picking up what the adults were trying to hide. We settled onto the weathered picnic bench, lake water lapping gently against the shore 20 feet away. Pine scent mixed with the earthy smell of lake water, sounds of children playing in the distance. It should have been peaceful. Instead, it felt like the calm before a storm. Brandon cleared his throat. Once. Twice. Isabel twisted a napkin in her hands until it began to tear. Dad, Brandon began, his voice carrying a weight I'd never heard before. We need to talk. I sat between them, my son and daughter-in-law, feeling the warmth of sun on my arms and the chill of something I couldn't yet name creeping up my spine. The lake stretched out before us, peaceful and eternal, while whatever words Brandon was gathering threatened to change everything. Emma's laughter echoed across the water as she chased the frisbee James had thrown too high. Innocent joy, untouched by whatever storm was about to break over our family. I folded my hands on the table and waited. Dad, you know how real estate markets are these days. Brandon's voice carried that rehearsed casualness I'd heard him use with difficult clients. He watched Emma and James sprint toward the playground equipment, ensuring they were well out of earshot before continuing. Your house has appreciated significantly. I shifted on the bench, creating subtle distance between us. Isabel twisted a paper napkin from our packed lunch until white shreds scattered like snow across the weathered table. Her silence spoke louder than any words could. What exactly is this business opportunity, son? I kept my voice level, but my internal radar had activated. And why the sudden urgency? Brandon's palms left damp prints on the table as he leaned forward. Well, you see, there's this cash flow situation. Temporary, of course, but the timing is critical. And your house, it's just sitting there, you know? All that equity, doing nothing. The calculated approach hit me like cold water. He'd rehearsed this speech, probably practiced it with Isabel. Every word carefully chosen to make his desperation sound like logic. I've lived in that house for 40 years, I said quietly. Your mother and I raised you there. Her garden is still blooming. But Dad, think practically. His voice rose slightly, frustration bleeding through the facade. You're rattling around in all that space. Maintenance costs, property taxes, it's become a burden, hasn't it? I studied his face, noting the dark circles that makeup couldn't hide, the way his jaw clenched between sentences. How much money are we talking about, Brandon? And what happens if this opportunity doesn't pan out? His answers came too quickly, contradicting each other. The time frames shifted from months to weeks to immediately. The amounts grew vague, enough to secure our future, and more than you'd expect. Isabel closed her eyes briefly, as if in physical pain. When she opened them, they were bright with unshed tears. Where would I live? I asked. For the first time, Isabel spoke. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. We've looked at our budget. There's room for you with us. The kids would love having Grandpa around all the time. The coordination struck me like a blow. They'd planned this thoroughly, discussing my future living arrangements without consulting me. The children I could hear laughing in the distance had been used as emotional leverage before they even knew it. Brandon, I said, my voice gaining strength, what aren't you telling me? What's really happening here? His mask began to slip. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the lake breeze. Dad, you don't understand. This isn't just about opportunity anymore. There are people involved, commitments made. What kind of commitments? The kind that don't wait for convenient timing. My paternal instincts warred with growing alarm. 40 years of reading my son's face told me he was genuinely frightened. But 40 years of being his father also told me that whatever he'd gotten himself into, he was trying to drag me down with him. No, I said firmly. The word hung in the air between us like a challenge. Brandon's face transformed the moment that single word left my lips. The mask of reasonable discussion crumbled, revealing something desperate and dangerous underneath. I stood from the bench, speaking with the dignity that comes from 7 decades of hard-earned wisdom. That house means everything to me, son. It's where your mother took her last breath, where we celebrated your first steps. I won't sell our family's heart for someone else's emergency. Instead of understanding, Brandon shot up from the bench, his chair scraping harshly against concrete. He began pacing like a caged animal, his voice climbing toward hysteria. You stubborn old fool! Don't you get it? This isn't optional anymore. His hands gestured wildly as words tumbled out. You think this is about wanting money? You think I have choices here? Isabel grabbed his arm, a warning gesture he shook off with such violence that she flinched backward. I watched my son unravel, seeing glimpses of something that terrified him beyond reason. Brandon, what exactly are you so afraid of? He stepped closer, using his height advantage to tower over me. At 70, I'd grown slightly stooped, and my son used every inch of that difference to intimidate. You don't understand the pressure I'm under, the kind of people who don't accept excuses. My hand moved instinctively toward my phone. Let me call Richard Wilson. He can give us legal advice about— No lawyers! Brandon's shout echoed across the water. No outside help. This gets handled family style, or it doesn't get handled at all. I managed to start the video recording while pretending to dial, holding the phone naturally as if making a call. The red dot appeared on screen just as Brandon's control finally snapped completely. Cool off, old man! He grabbed my shoulders, his fingers digging in hard enough to leave bruises. Maybe a reality check will help you think straight. The shove came without warning. 40 years younger, 40 pounds heavier, and fueled by desperation, Brandon pushed with enough force to send me stumbling backward. My aging reflexes couldn't compensate fast enough. The cold shock of Lake Harmony hit me like a physical blow. Water rushed into my nose and mouth as I went under, the temperature differential between the warm July air and the lake's depths making my heart stutter irregularly. My sodden clothes immediately became anchors, pulling me down while my shoes struggled for purchase on the muddy bottom. I flailed toward the surface, gasping and choking, my phone held instinctively above my head. The water was shallow enough that I wasn't drowning, but deep enough to be dangerous for a man my age. Hypothermia could set in quickly. Disorientation, heart stress. Instead of rushing to help, Brandon stood at the water's edge and laughed. Not the nervous release of tension, but genuine, cruel satisfaction mixed with stress-induced hysteria. Maybe now you'll think straight, instead of being sentimental about some old house. His voice carried across the water with sharp-edged mockery. Sometimes people need encouragement to see reason. Isabel remained frozen on the shore, her hands pressed to her mouth in horror. She made no move to help, paralyzed somewhere between loyalty to her husband and revulsion at his actions. The children's laughter continued in the distance, playground sounds masking the confrontation. Emma and James remained blissfully unaware that their grandfather was chest-deep in cold water, struggling to find stable footing while their father stood watching with satisfaction. I found my balance at last, water streaming from my clothes, and looked up at my son with dawning realization of who he had become. Water streamed from my clothes as I waded toward shore with deliberate calm. Each step felt purposeful despite being soaked to the bone, my movements controlled by a cold clarity that had replaced confusion. Brandon and Isabel watched uncertainly from the bank, expecting anger or pleading, but my silence seemed to unnerve them more than any outburst could have. I walked past Brandon without a word or glance, my shoes squelching against the muddy shore as I headed steadily toward the parking area. Behind me, his voice carried a note of panic I'd never heard before. "Dad, come on, let's talk about this like reasonable people." Still, I said nothing. Isabel followed at a distance, her maternal instincts apparently sensing that something fundamental had shifted in our family dynamic. Her footsteps on gravel sounded hesitant, uncertain. When I reached my ford, I turned to face Brandon, who had hurried after me with increasing desperation. Water continued dripping from my clothes, creating small puddles on the asphalt, while I calmly held up my phone, showing the screen clearly displaying a video recording in progress. Brandon's face transformed from confusion to absolute horror as understanding crashed over him. "You recorded that? You recorded our private family conversation?" "I recorded everything, Brandon." My voice carried the temperature of the lake water, still clinging to my skin. "Every word you said, every action you took, every moment you assaulted your 70-year-old father." He lunged forward, reaching for the phone, but I stepped back smoothly. "Touch me again, and this video goes directly to the Minneapolis Police Department. I know exactly which laws you've broken today." His earlier aggression collapsed into pure panic. "Dad, wait. You don't understand the pressure I'm under. The kind of people who'll hurt my family if I don't—" "I understand assault when I see it," I interrupted with cold precision. "An elder abuse. The state of Minnesota takes both very seriously, especially when there's clear video evidence." Brandon's voice cracked as desperation consumed him completely. "You can't seriously be thinking of calling the police on your own son, your grandchildren's father." I opened my car door, engine keys already in hand. "I'm thinking of protecting myself from someone who just proved he's willing to use violence against his own family for money." Isabel remained silent throughout the exchange, understanding that we'd crossed a line from which there could be no return to normal family relationships. The grandfather who had loved unconditionally, who had always been there with support and wisdom, was looking at them now with the cold assessment of a stranger. "Brandon, you'll be hearing from my attorney. This video will be evidence in whatever legal proceedings follow." I slid into the driver's seat, starting the engine while they stood frozen in the parking lot. "I suggest you use whatever time you have left to figure out how to explain this to Emma and James." Through my window, I delivered my final words. "Watch me." I drove away slowly, watching in my rearview mirror as Brandon and Isabel shrank to distant figures, standing amid the ruins of what had once been a family gathering. The lake sparkled peacefully in the afternoon sun, while their destroyed world reflected nothing but the consequences of greed and desperation. The weight of what had just happened hadn't fully hit me yet, but I knew it would. For now I had evidence, I had witnesses, and I had the power to ensure that violence would never again be used against me in the name of family loyalty. My hands shook slightly on the steering wheel as I pulled away from Lake Harmony, the heater running full blast against my soaked clothes. The radio played an oldies station. Sweet Caroline drifted through the speakers, the same song Brandon used to sing along to as a child, bouncing in his car seat during our fishing trips. Muscle memory made me pull over at the familiar oak tree 30 minutes into the drive home. This massive old giant had witnessed our best father-son moments over the years. Here I'd taught Brandon to tie fishing knots with patient repetition. Here we'd shared peanut butter sandwiches while planning weekend adventures that never seemed long enough. I sat beneath those same sprawling branches, my wet clothes still clinging uncomfortably, and pulled out my wallet. Behind my driver's license, I kept an old photograph. Brandon at 10 years old, gap-toothed smile beaming as he held up his first caught fish, a tiny bluegill that might as well have been a marlin, judging by his expression of pure joy. The contrast hit me like a physical blow. That loving child who cried when he accidentally stepped on a butterfly had pushed his 70-year-old father into a lake today. The boy who used to fall asleep holding my hand during car rides home from fishing trips had threatened me with violence for refusing to sell my house. Where had I gone wrong? Was I too permissive during his teenage years? Too demanding about grades and responsibility? Had I missed crucial signs of the man he was becoming while focusing on the child I remembered? How do you grieve someone who's still alive but lost to you? I whispered to the oak tree. The same question Margaret had asked about her estranged sister years ago. Now I understood the unique pain of that loss, watching someone you love become a stranger wearing your child's face. Every memory felt contaminated now, teaching him to drive in this same spot, celebrating his college graduation, walking him down the aisle at his wedding to Isabel. Had any of those moments been real, or had I been fooling myself about who my son truly was? The phone buzzed insistently against the passenger seat, jerking me back to the present crisis. I didn't read the message yet, but its presence reminded me this wasn't just nostalgic grief. This was an active emergency requiring immediate decisions about my safety, my home, and my grandchildren's welfare. I folded the photograph carefully, placing it back in my wallet behind my license. The boy in that picture deserved to be remembered, even if the man he'd become had chosen a different path entirely. Starting the engine, I pulled back onto the highway toward home. Whatever message waited on my phone, whatever consequences followed from today's events, I would face them as the same man who had raised a child, with infinite patience and love. Even if that child had forgotten how to return either. The house felt different when I finally arrived home, safe but hollow, like a shell protecting something that no longer existed. I dropped my wet clothes directly into the washing machine, then stood under the hottest shower water I could tolerate. The heat penetrated my chilled bones, but couldn't reach the cold that had settled in my chest. In the kitchen, I prepared a simple dinner of soup and crackers, but managed only a few spoonfuls before pushing the bowl away. My appetite had disappeared somewhere between my son's first threat and his final shove into the lake. At 70, stress affected me differently than it used to. Everything felt more fragile, more consequential. Evening light filtered through Margaret's curtains as I settled into her favorite chair, surrounded by family photo albums I'd pulled from the bookshelf. Every picture of Brandon now demanded re-examination through the lens of today's events. Birthday parties, graduations, Christmas mornings. Had I been blind to warning signs that were obvious in retrospect? I considered calling Richard Wilson, my lawyer friend, but decided to wait until morning. Legal action against your own son required careful thought, not emotional reaction. The video evidence wasn't going anywhere, and rushing into criminal charges felt premature without understanding the full situation. At 9:30 p.m., my phone chimed with an incoming text message. The sender's name made me pause. Isabel. She had my number from the emergency contact list at Emma and James's school, a detail that seemed insignificant until this moment. Her message appeared longer than usual, emotional urgency evident even in the preview text. Derek, I'm so sorry about today. Brandon is under enormous pressure from dangerous people. They're threatening him, threatening us all. Can we meet tomorrow? Just us. He doesn't know I'm contacting you. Please. I read the message 3 times, processing implications that extended far beyond a family argument about money, dangerous people, threats against the family. Isabel reaching out secretly, risking Brandon's anger to contact me. My paternal instincts warred with the memory of Isabel's silent complicity during today's confrontation. She'd watched her husband push his elderly father into a lake without moving to help. But perhaps she'd been trapped between loyalty to her husband and fear of something even worse. The mention of threats against us all sent ice through my veins. Did that include Emma and James? Were my grandchildren in actual danger, while I'd been treating this as a family dispute about financial boundaries? I composed my response carefully, maintaining control while leaving the door open for crucial information. Tomorrow, 10 a.m., Cozy Corner Cafe on Main Street. Come alone. Her reply came within minutes. Thank you. I'll explain everything. Setting the phone aside, I checked the door locks twice and turned off the lights throughout the house. Tomorrow's meeting would either clarify misunderstandings or confirm my worst fears about the scope of this crisis. Either way, I would face it with the same determination that had sustained me through 70 years of life's challenges. I arrived at Cozy Corner Cafe 15 minutes early, choosing a corner table that provided clear sight lines to both the entrance and parking lot. The morning coffee crowd offered perfect cover for a private conversation while ensuring public safety. After ordering black coffee, I reviewed yesterday's video one final time, steeling myself for whatever revelations awaited. Isabel entered precisely at 10 o'clock, wearing sunglasses despite the cloudy July morning and a light scarf around her neck. Odd choices for the weather that immediately caught my attention. Her movements seemed cautious, almost furtive, as she scanned the cafe before approaching my table. When she removed her sunglasses, I saw exhaustion etched in every line of her face. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the coffee cup I'd ordered for her. "I'm so sorry about yesterday," she began, voice barely above a whisper. "What Brandon did was inexcusable. But Derek, you need to understand the pressure he's been under." "What kind of pressure makes a man assault his own father?" I kept my voice level, but my eyes never left her face. Isabel glanced around nervously before continuing. 6 months ago, Brandon borrowed money for what he thought was a legitimate business expansion. The people seemed professional, official, but the terms kept changing, interest rates climbing, penalties appearing from nowhere. She pushed up her sleeve slightly, revealing purple bruises around her wrists that explained the scarf's purpose. "These aren't from Brandon. They're from visitors who came to our house last week when he wasn't home. They wanted to make sure I understood how serious their business relationship had become." My coffee cup froze halfway to my lips. "They threatened you? In your own home?" "They took photos of Emma and James walking to school, showed me the pictures as proof of how easily they could reach our children." Isabel's voice broke slightly. That's when I knew this had moved beyond money into something much more dangerous. The pieces clicked together with horrifying clarity. Brandon's desperation about the house sale wasn't greed. It was terror. The timeline, the urgency, the willingness to destroy family relationships for cash. He'd been trying to save his children the only way he knew how. "How much does he owe them?" I asked quietly. "It started at 50,000. With interest and penalties, it's grown to nearly 200,000. They want payment by the end of this week, or they move from threats to action." Isabel leaned forward, her voice dropping even lower. "I didn't contact you about the house sale. I contacted you because I don't know how else to protect Emma and James. Brandon's pride won't let him ask for help, but these people, they're not going to wait much longer." I studied her face, seeing genuine fear mixed with desperate hope. "Why didn't you come to me sooner, before things escalated to violence?" "Brandon made me promise. He said involving you would only make things worse, put more family members at risk. But after yesterday, after seeing what desperation made him do," she dabbed her eyes with a napkin, "I realized staying silent was protecting no one. The full scope of the crisis settled over me like a heavy blanket. This wasn't just family dysfunction, it was my grandchildren's lives hanging in the balance, caught between their father's criminal entanglements and genuinely dangerous people who had already demonstrated their reach. These people who threatened you, did you see faces? Get names? Isabel shook her head. They were very careful about that, professional in the worst possible way. I sat back in my chair, processing information that transformed yesterday's betrayal into today's emergency. My son hadn't just assaulted me. He'd been trying to save his children using the only resource he thought could help fast enough. The question now was whether it was too late for any of us to find a solution that didn't destroy what remained of our family. Hanging my coat in the same closet where I'd grabbed my jacket for that disastrous lake trip felt like completing a symbolic circle. 2 days ago, I'd left this house as a grandfather, worried about his son's strange behavior. Now I returned as a man who understood the true scope of the crisis threatening my family. The simple dinner I prepared, soup and a sandwich, sat mostly untouched on the kitchen table. My mind churned with images of Isabel's bruises, the fear in her voice when she mentioned photographs of Emma and James at school. This wasn't a family disagreement about money anymore. This was an actual criminal enterprise holding my grandchildren hostage. I moved to Margaret's chair in the living room, settling into the worn cushions for the first time since her funeral 6 months ago. If ever I needed her wisdom, it was now. She'd always been the strategic thinker in our marriage, the one who saw solutions where I saw only problems. "What would you do, sweetheart?" I whispered to the empty room. The answer came to me with startling clarity. "Get professional help." This situation required expertise I didn't possess: legal knowledge, criminal procedure, financial strategy. 45 years of friendship had prepared me for this moment. I retrieved my old address book from the kitchen drawer, its leather binding worn smooth by decades of use. Richard Wilson's name appeared on the first page under W, my first call whenever life threw curves I couldn't handle alone. We'd served together in Korea, shared best man duties at each other's weddings, mourned each other's losses. "Richard, I need your professional help," I said when he answered on the second ring. "It's about Brandon, and it's serious. Can we meet tomorrow morning?" "Of course, Derek. Come to my office at 9 a.m. Bring whatever documentation you have." No questions asked. That was Richard, understanding that some conversations required face-to-face security. Next, I moved to my study, sitting at the same desk where I'd stared at medical bills that morning Brandon called. The irony wasn't lost on me. Financial worries had started this crisis, and financial solutions might end it. I pulled out stationery and began writing carefully measured words. "My dear Emma and James, Grandfather loves you more than all the stars in the sky. Sometimes families face challenges that require adults to make difficult decisions. Whatever happens in the coming days, remember that everything Grandfather does comes from love for you both." The letter continued with age-appropriate explanations, careful not to frighten while preparing them for possible changes. I sealed it in an envelope marked, "For Emma and James, in case of emergency." Then I began organizing information systematically: video evidence of Brandon's assault, financial records showing my available savings, timeline of events from Isabel's testimony, notes about criminal threats. By the time I finished, I had a clear picture of our resources and challenges. My savings account contained enough to address the immediate debt without selling the house. Not comfortable, but possible. The question was whether professional intervention could transform this crisis into manageable legal cooperation. Tomorrow, Richard would help me understand our options. Tonight, I prepared for every possibility, planning rather than grieving for the family I thought I knew. Richard's law office occupied the 15th floor of a downtown Minneapolis business building, its windows offering a panoramic view of the city where my family's crisis was unfolding. I arrived 15 minutes early, accepting coffee from his secretary to steady nerves that had kept me awake most of the night. The conference room reflected Richard's successful practice: floor-to-ceiling law books, framed certificates, family photographs that reminded me why I trusted this man with my most precious concerns. When he entered carrying a yellow legal pad, His expression carried the professional gravity I remembered from our most serious conversations over the decades. "Show me everything, Derek." I methodically presented the phone video, watching Richard's face tighten as Brandon's voice shouted threats and his hands shoved me into the lake. Then I recounted Isabel's cafe confession, the loan sharks, escalating threats, photographs of children at school. Richard took detailed notes, asking specific questions about timelines, amounts owed, physical evidence of threats. His pen moved steadily across the legal pad as I painted a complete picture of our family's entanglement with genuine criminals. "The video evidence is strong," he said finally. "Elder abuse charges alone carry serious penalties in Minnesota, but the criminal conspiracy angle gives us significant leverage. What about the children's safety during this process?" I leaned forward, my primary concern taking precedence over legal technicalities. "We'll structure this as debt negotiation initially, not criminal prosecution. That reduces immediate risk while building our case." Richard's strategy began taking shape through his explanation. "Your savings can serve as good faith payment, buying time for Brandon's cooperation to develop." We spent the next hour developing a comprehensive framework. Richard explained how escrow arrangements could protect my financial interests while satisfying criminal demands. He outlined cooperation agreements that would require Brandon's full disclosure about the criminal organization in exchange for family assistance. "The key is timing," Richard continued, sketching diagrams on his legal pad. "We approach the debt holders through controlled legal channels, offering structured payment in exchange for documented release of all family members from further obligation. The conditions we developed were specific and non-negotiable. Brandon's complete cooperation with law enforcement, mandatory rehabilitation program addressing his gambling and poor financial decisions, family therapy sessions, regular check-ins with probation-like oversight. "Can you make these legally enforceable?" I asked, understanding that good intentions wouldn't survive family pressure. "Absolutely. We'll structure this as a formal family contract with financial consequences for noncompliance. Your assistance becomes conditional on measurable behavioral changes." Richard scheduled a family meeting for Friday afternoon, 2 days hence, allowing time for preliminary contact with the criminal organization through legal intermediaries. He explained safety protocols, contingency plans, and my role in the negotiations. "Derek, this plan addresses immediate threats while preserving long-term family relationships," he said as we shook hands at his office door. "Your patience and resources are creating possibilities for redemption that didn't exist yesterday." I carried a folder of legal documents down to the parking garage, specific instructions for Friday's family meeting weighing both heavily and hopefully in my briefcase. The plan was in motion, but execution would determine whether we saved my family or lost them forever. Friday afternoon, I arranged my living room chairs in a circle, the same space where we'd celebrated birthdays and holidays in happier times. Richard arrived first, reviewing documents while I checked the coffee pot and straightened cushions with nervous energy. Isabel entered with Emma and James, who immediately gravitated toward me with their usual enthusiasm. "Grandpa, can we play with your train set?" Emma asked, tugging on my sleeve. "In a little while, sweetheart. The grown-ups need to have an important talk first." Tension filled the room when Brandon appeared in the doorway, his face darkening when he saw Richard's legal pad and briefcase. "What is this? Some kind of intervention?" "It's a family meeting," I said calmly, gesturing toward the remaining chair. "Please sit down, son." Richard began with professional detachment, outlining the legal situation. "Based on evidence and testimony, criminal charges are possible. However, we're here to discuss an alternative that protects everyone's interests." Brandon's defensiveness crumbled when Richard replayed the video evidence. Watching himself assault his elderly father seemed to break something inside him. His shoulders sagged as the full weight of his actions became undeniable. "The children," Isabel whispered, glancing toward Emma and James, who were building with blocks in the corner, blissfully unaware of adult tensions. I leaned forward, addressing my son directly. "I'll help you, Brandon, but this ends here. No more secrets, no more dangerous shortcuts, no more violence." "You don't understand the pressure," he began. "Actually, we do understand," Richard interrupted smoothly. That's why we're offering a structured solution instead of simply pressing charges. The conditions were presented systematically. My savings would fund debt resolution through escrow arrangements. Brandon would cooperate fully with authorities regarding the criminal organization, mandatory rehabilitation addressing his gambling problems, family therapy sessions, and regular accountability meetings. Brandon wrestled visibly with his pride, glancing between his children playing innocently and the adults offering his only viable escape from criminal entanglement. I don't have a choice, do I? There's always a choice, I replied quietly. The question is whether you're ready to make the right one. His acceptance came reluctantly but genuinely. I'll do whatever it takes to protect Emma and James. And earn back your trust, Dad. The formal signing took 20 minutes. Brandon's signature on cooperation agreements, Isabel's witness statements, Richard's legal documentation transforming crisis into manageable process. Throughout it all, Emma and James continued playing, protected from knowledge of dangers that had threatened their young lives. When the paperwork was complete, Brandon knelt beside his children, gathering them into a fierce embrace. Daddy's going to be better, he promised them, starting right now. Isabel showed her first genuine smile in months, relief replacing the fear that had haunted her features since the lake confrontation. The rehabilitation would be difficult, the therapy sessions challenging, but the immediate danger was over. Richard packed his briefcase with satisfaction of a job well done. This framework gives everyone a path forward. Brandon has consequences and support. The children have safety and stability. Derek, you've created possibilities for redemption that didn't exist 3 days ago. As they prepared to leave, I pulled Brandon aside. I love you, son. I always have. But love requires boundaries now. He nodded, tears in his eyes. I understand. Thank you for not giving up on us. Watching them drive away, I felt cautious optimism settling where anger and betrayal had lived for the past week. The problems weren't solved overnight, but healing had begun with honest conversation and professional guidance. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.